Welcome back to Detailed, an original podcast by RCAT. This is a show where we uncover lessons learned to help you navigate your next project. I'm Cherise Lakeside, Senior Spec Writer at RDH Building Science, and your host. My guests today are Travis Albrecht, Studio Director and Principal, and Michael Waddell, Senior Associate Design Director at Gensler in their Austin, Texas office. Travis is a highly sought-after resource within the firm for his design vision and expertise in sustainable design and planning. He has experience with a wide range of project types, from commercial office buildings and mixed-use developments to educational spaces and master planning. He is knowledgeable regarding all phases of a project, from conceptual design to detailing and construction administration. Travis is also involved in strategic planning and thought leadership in Gensler's office on topics including digital design, design resilience, and design purpose. Since joining Gensler in 2011, Michael has developed a research-driven approach to each of his projects, centered on user experience and creating transformational places. Michael's focus is on the planning and design of mixed-use projects, bringing the same user-centric approach with a focus on experience at a human scale. Michael is passionate about the built environment and the role placemaking plays in our lives. His current focus is on maximizing walkability in our communities and prioritizing people in the planning and design process. The project we're talking about today is the Fifth and Tillery office building in Austin, Texas. At the seam between East Austin's quiet neighborhoods and the grit of its industrial past, Fifth and Tillery begins with an act of restraint. Instead of expanding outward, the project turns inward, reclaiming a neglected warehouse and reimagining its bones as a porous, living campus for work and community. The result is not a new monument, but a renewed place, a building that remembers where it came from while pointing toward what cities can become. Now, let's get into the details. Welcome back to Detailed. My guests today are Travis Albrecht, Studio Director and Principal, and Michael Waddell, Senior Associate and Design Director at Gensler in their Austin, Texas office. Okay, I have to tell you, I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I was terribly disappointed last week when I was doing some homework for this episode to find out that Austin coined the term "Keep Austin Weird" before Portland coined the term "Keep Portland Weird." All us Oregonians are running around complaining about Austin copying our slogan and like, who do you guys think you are? And I found out we copied yours. So I am publicly apologizing to the city of Austin that we stole your slogan, although we love it as much as you do. And I've been to Austin. I love Austin. But I thought I'd eat a little crow here since you guys were coming from Austin and own that theft. The project we're talking about today is the Fifth and Tillery office building in Austin. Travis and Michael, welcome to Detailed. How are you?
Doing great.
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having us.
No, I'm excited to chat with you guys about this project. It's Friday. That's always a good thing.
That's right.
So
go
ahead.
I was going to say that there's enough weird to go around for both of us, so don't worry about who got there first.
Yeah, no, I could not agree with you more. I felt very at home in Austin when I visited. I have to tell you that. So I always start with an icebreaker question just to get us warmed up a little bit and get to know you and have our listeners get to know you a little bit. And it's different every time, just whatever I choose out of the air. So I have found that I've been in this business a long time, mostly in architecture, now in building science. Most architecture professionals have one or more, oftentimes more, areas of interest that they are really passionate about within or related to our industries, whether it's an association or sustainability or something, along those lines. Tell me about one of your passions outside of your day-to-day work, even if it relates to your day-to-day work. Tell me about one of your passions and why it's so important to you.
You want me to? I can start.
Okay.
So for me, it is related really to the profession, but what I've become more and more passionate about over the years is really like creating great places and sort of the process of creative placemaking. Because for me, it's really where the rubber meets the road for the built environment, right? Like if we, um, the effect that the built environment has on people's lives and, the importance of creating great spaces for people to live out their lives, right? That's what I'm most passionate about. And then I think really how sustainability works into that so that it's not they're not two different conversations, they're the same conversation. So I think a lot of the great spaces and places that everybody loves and enjoys, should be sustainable and should have that lens put on them. So those are kind of my two passions, I'd say.
Well, I love that because I don't know that we always, especially in today's day and age where budgets are getting tighter and schedules are getting shorter, and it's just this hard push to get this done. I think we've lost a little bit of the how does this make a person feel? And I know that matters to me greatly. I have a 3-story townhome, and my office is on the top floor because this is where I have all the windows and the light.
Right. Yep.
And that matters to me. It matters in my mood all day long. And I think we're losing that a little bit in the crunch to crunch the numbers and try to get as much building as you can for the dollars that you have. How about you, Michael?
Sure. So, in terms of outside of work, I try to experience the world in our cities as much on two wheels as possible. I'm an avid cyclist, getting into dirt biking, mountain biking. But even this project that we're going to talk about, I think I did most of my site visits riding my bike to the site and just really getting to experience our cities that way. And then in terms of the practice of architecture, what really excites me is just the process that we go through. I mean, I think there's that kind of magical moment at the beginning of every project where you're sort of given a somewhat open prompt by your client, and then you're able to gather your team members, and we all have really unique backgrounds and experiences and travels and trips and things that have resonated with us through our experiences, and just the ability to bring in different points of views and explore, investigate, and hopefully craft the unexpected to create a special place. To Travis's point, I mean, I think that's really exciting, just the opportunity to work in a way and a process that leads us to creating amazing places for people to visit. And then to that point around craft, before I joined Gensler, I actually did design build for 12 years and, worked in an office that, had a steel and wood shop and our office was in a warehouse. It was sort of all integrated and really, working at a level of understanding the materiality and the detailing and, I think the way that buildings and systems come together and the way that structure can sort of express and enhance the experience of space. I think so, not just thinking about the process we go through in the design, but then how we really execute that vision and how it all comes together is something that really excites me about the practice of architecture.
I personally think some of the best architects out there are ones that actually have worked in some form on the construction side. The biggest complaint I hear, I just did a presentation yesterday in Texas, got home late last night too. This happened to be a bunch of irrigation installers, 400 irrigation installers. But I present in a lot of different arenas, and I have talked to contractors, and their biggest complaint is these architects don't know how these things actually come together. I hear that over and over again. And I mean, it's not like you don't have enough to learn, right? I mean, you guys have a lot of stuff you have to know. But I do think that changes the game in the profession when you're designing the building and you have some exposure and some experience in how that vision might actually have to in real life come together, which that vision doesn't always come together the way we think we'd like it to.
Yeah.
So great answers from both of you.
Yeah.
Let's.
Well, I think on that one, like
Go ahead.
there's just people inherently know when something's been well thought out and well executed. Like even at a glance, you can tell the difference between those two things. Even if you're not involved in this profession, you can just look at things and understand, like, yeah, that they really thought that through and considered that, right? So whether that comes from the architect and design side, or it comes from, the fabricators and craftspeople that put these things together, it's got to come from somewhere. And so, yeah, having that knowledge ahead of time just helps the whole process.
Well, we all know we lose the most money during the construction phase. On the design side, if we have not put together good contract documents, which are important to me as a spec writer, that you can move through the project efficiently and not have to solve, hopefully, a lot of challenges during the construction phase. So before we start talking about specifics on Fifth and Tillery, give me a little background in history on this building.
Sure, I can jump in on that one. So Fifth and Tillery, it's at a really interesting spot of East Austin. It's along Fifth Street. There's a whole lot of older industrial buildings, and so this building in particular was, I believe, and Travis, correct me, I think it was like a 200-foot by 375-foot footprint. Really like a one-story. The original warehouse is a one-story Butler building. It was not in great condition, but you like a lot of old buildings, you could say, had good bones. It had a good solid foundation, something to start with. But it was really this warehouse that had been used in different ways over the years as creative space, studios, wood shops, and when we started taking a look at it, it was in the process of some light renovations and really trying to reimagine its next life as a place for creatives in the neighborhood. And but for all intents and purposes, it was the site when we got it was almost, I don't know, 98% impervious cover, 99% impervious cover, is a whole lot of paving and a gigantic warehouse. So it's really interesting diving into this project. So in terms of adaptive reuse, and Travis can touch on this as well, you know, on a lot of these projects, they live for years before they become real projects. And you've got a client and they say, hey, I've got this piece of property, I'm thinking about doing this on it. And, we kick around some ideas on it. And so when we first started talking to our client about it, he wanted us to, basically say, like, how do we create a great space for creatives to come together on this site? I want to try to work with what we have and see what we can do. And the initial design studies on the project, looked at how do we work with the existing bent frames, and, are we adding skylights and light wells to this giant footprint? When you would go in that existing building, it was dark, it was cavernous, it was oppressive, it was not somewhere you wanted to be. It only had small windows on one side of the building. And we really worked through a range of different design schemes in the beginning and concepts where we're scabbing on structure to create mezzanines and, starting to carve in light wells. And we sort of reached a point in the creative process working through this with the client where, um, that it wasn't doing enough to create enough of a place or enough of that environment we were looking to create. And so at a certain point, we had to abandon the existing steel bent frame and really look at it as adaptive reuse within the framework of the site. And so the city of Austin has different entitlement processes that sort of scrutinize projects at different levels. And so being able to utilize the existing foundation and sort of framework to the site has sort of locked us into a box where it's like, kind of like, hey, Gensler, we can give you this box to play within. And so that was really that, 4-foot foundation footprint of the building. And then within that, we looked at, well, how do we weave in a new structure into this foundation, work around sort of the existing spaghetti that exists within that ground plane, and try to create a tremendous experience sort of within that framework of kind of like site-wide adaptive reuse. But in the end, sort of through the explorations, we had to part ways with some of the existing structure and sort of take an approach of, surgically, inserting a new grid of structure into this existing warehouse and almost rebuilding from that existing slab up to I think create something that got to the level of vision and experience of what we were trying to create on site.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, I think yeah, and I think that Michael used the right phrase here, sort of adaptive reuse of the site, and not necessarily of the building vertical structure itself. So still having to stick with a lot of the infrastructure, utilities, drainage patterns, all that kind of stuff. And then even building height, right? Like we had to match the existing building heights. And I think that also goes to what's interesting from adaptive reuse, and that as a strategy is it kind of keeps the same form and shape and envelope that has existed for a long time in this neighborhood. And I think that was also another important thing about the site itself is it's, as Michael described, like uh, most of Fifth Street from downtown to where this building hits is old warehouse buildings. But then this is really at that line where then it transitions to actually a neighborhood. And so this building kind of sits on that line. So we were also trying to be mindful of the scale of the project, that it didn't exceed what had existed for a long time to overwhelm, the adjacent neighborhood. So those are all important factors too, in kind of how we approach things and kept within, the existing limits, right?
Well, I think you did a really good job of, you can't put a big, shiny, sparkly thing in the middle of an industrial area. You did a really good job of honoring the industrial history on this building, but still, I'm looking at it and it looks to me, even though it honors that industrial side in the makeup of the building, it still looks very warm, very inviting. And if you're going into a neighborhood next, assuming that's what you were looking to do, and still looks modern while still fitting in to both of those areas on each side of it. And that's not an easy thing to do. Um,
No.
that's a really easy place to really screw something up and go too far in some direction or another. But I think you've done a fantastic job of that here, because I'm looking at it and going, okay, that makes sense, but it's going to work. It's going to work there and not look like this thing that's sticking out like a sore thumb. One of these things is not like the others, kind of thing. So you had a statement in your project description that I loved. And it was, quote, Fifth and Tillery is more than adaptive reuse. It's a model for regenerative urban design, proving that sustainability, beauty, and community can thrive within the bones of the past. Before we start really digging into specific design features and things like that, give me a broad description of the scope of this project that's now here.
So going back to that first conversation with the client, we met out on site like, architects and clients do, and you're sort of looking around and trying to get the lay of the land. And yeah, sort of the discussion was the client wanted to create a special place to bring creatives together. And it was, uh, a little bit of an open-ended prompt of like, how do we do this? How do we create a great place sort of within this, we're stuck with this foundation and this site. We can't orient the building in a different way. We're kind of limited on how we approach this thing, but how do we create a great experience and great building? And then, of course, there's, every project has a business case. And there was, the idea of trying to add square footage, add multiple levels, be able to get more tenants within the building. But it was really this prompt. And, the client, I think, was told us, and we had worked with them before, that they wanted to take some risk and really push what we could do from a design perspective. And it's interesting that, there's sort of the business case prompt, and then the client sort of had this like a little bit of an idea he had been kicking around. And he's like, I'm not sure where this is going to go, but like, what if the building feels like walking into a forest? What if there's sort of this warmth and sort of Nordic feeling to this? We're standing on this site that again is like 99% impervious cover. The 1% is probably like weeds coming through the asphalt on this site, and we're like, this is rough. Like, you know, we we're trying to design for well-being here, and we've got this site that's just all paving. I mean, it was a truck yard before, and just thinking about like how do we, if we're really limited to the footprint of this warehouse, how do we start to solve for some of these well-being issues and introduce biophilia and landscape into the project? And so it was this really interesting process where it's like there's a business case, there's sort of a loose vision of what the experience might feel like, and then incrementally along the way, like everything was really a question of like, how do we do more with what we have with the end user in mind? And I think going back to design process, what was super fun about this was just like, well, we need daylight. How do we do that? And then so all these sort of decisions around, you know, well-being and performance sort of led to other opportunities, and the whole sort of thing just sort of evolved naturally through that process.
Yeah, I think, really, uh, it's amazing transformation, right? And so it's not enough, like, you can transform a site and a project in a lot of different ways, right? You can add on to it, you can subtract from it, you can do all kinds of things. But I think our goal here, again, to Michael's point, was how does it change the site to the better, right? For both, potentially the site itself, but then also the people who are going to work there day in and day out. And how does it, foster well-being, but how does it foster connectivity and community as well as a building, right? Like, some buildings you just go in, we were talking about this, some buildings you just go in and you hit the elevator and you don't see anybody except the people in your particular office suite, um, and then you leave and that's it, right? I think because we were sort of designing towards that idea of a creative community, that we wanted the building to respond and play a role in that. So that's, also part of it is it helps be a social connector as well. And that was a big design driver in addition to like biophilia and daylight, was how does the building facilitate people seeing one another even though they may not work together, and all those kinds of things. Really, because we started with a giant, footprint, like I said, when you walked into the warehouse building originally, you couldn't see the other end of it because it was so dark. So really carving the building and creating opportunities for daylight to come in, and then that kind of creating opportunities for vegetation and all those kinds of things. But the other strategy we talked about was, again, it's, people don't often think about it, but it's a passive strategy from a sustainability standpoint as well. Like, instead of having a fully enclosed lobby that you have to condition and light and all those kinds of things, you actually approach this building from an open porch and open patio, again, part of that welcoming gesture. But then it's your lobby is outdoors. So there is no indoor space that acts as a lobby. And so that's part of turning things inside out. The other was, like I mentioned, all the walkways, all the circulation, on each floor between, again, we conceived of it as a multi-tenant building. So the circulation that would otherwise be in a center core building buried inside the center of the building, and again, a space that's really just about transitioning people and has no real value other than that, but you have to spend money conditioning it and lighting it, and all the materials that go along with that. So this, really turned that inside out. And because we wanted to carve the courtyard from a daylight perspective, that also became the opportunity to center the circulation around that. It also, kind of, again, to that point, instead of you walking down a corridor on your floor where your suite is, you're walking outside and you're seeing other tenants circulate as well. So it becomes that visual connector and social connector. So that's why it kind of flips your typical center core office building inside out.
Yeah. And I think what was, you know, really exciting about how that sort of came to be was it was, probably a couple months of like what ifs that sort of led to this configuration. And it all really started with a bunch of daylight studies, and we were looking at skylights and light wells. I mean, I think at some point the thing looked like a giant donut with two holes in it. And, there's sort of like, trying to solve this sort of puzzle of how do you work within this giant footprint and create a great experience. And it was like, well, what if we just made this two 80-foot bars with a central courtyard, and that's a, kind of ideal width for double-sided daylighting in an office environment. And then it was sort of this idea of, well, then if we do that, how does our core work? Well, what if our core work sort of creates this uh, entry plaza? And it's like, well, that's an interesting idea, but it's Texas, it's hot. And we're like, well, this building's oriented in this way where it's actually like really catching the predominant breezes from the southeast. And so how do we really start to shape this in a way to carry that into the space? And then we were working with Cameron Campbell, landscape architect, on the project. And it's like, well, what if we bring in, a grove of trees across the front of this courtyard and then start to bring that landscaping down inside of it? And then we're like, well, we need this soil depth to create this. And we're like, well, what if we start redirecting a lot of the roof stormwater and make that central landscaping a rain garden and really improve the quality of how the site impacts the greater neighborhood with 99% impervious cover? And sort of, incrementally, we just kept making these decisions. I mean, there was no sort of like, this is what it should be. It was, we need all these corridors and connections. And so, what if we made a living room on the second floor? So the walkways sort of create this broader connection where, you sort of get this lobby element on the second floor. And then even, we've got this great plaza space, and Travis touched on this, but community was a huge part of this. And so that monumental stair going up from the plaza to the second level also doubles as a space for community events. And one thing I just wanted to touch on in the story of this project is that the neighborhood and context was extremely important. I know Travis, I think he used to have a maker shop over on the east side. And then I've lived in East Austin pretty much from graduating University of Texas here in Austin. And there was this studio tour, East Austin Studio Tour, which is now a broader Austin citywide studio tour, where all these artists and makers would open their spaces up. And a lot of these spaces were warehouses similar to the one we were looking at the beginning of this project. And so there's already this culture and community around like inviting the public into these spaces. And so that was really a big driver for, trying to make the front of this building and that plaza space feel super inviting and flexible for the community. And so there were a lot of what ifs and decisions that sort of just rolled into, making something that turned out to be an inside out office building in a way.
Yeah. It's kind of funny too, like if you think about it, typically an office building, and especially of this kind of scale, they tend to be maybe a little more suburban. And so your landscape is outside, like around the building. But considering, again, our constraints and trying to work within this existing footprint and not being able to totally affect the rest of the site, we kind of brought the landscape into the middle. So that's another sort of take on the inside out nature of this project.
So I understand that Cap Metro, the region's public transit provider, has recently purchased this building for their administrative offices. Tell me about that relationship and what it means to have Cap Metro as the tenant occupying the building. Are they occupying the entire building?
They are. So they actually purchased the building. And what's interesting is there's some adjacencies at play. So right next door to Fifth and Tillery is actually one of their bus yards. And then a little bit further down Fifth Street is actually Cap Metro's headquarters. So strategically, it's adjacent, so it's nice to have that kind of more campus feel for them. But I think, at a larger picture, they were really interested in this building also because of all of its sustainability, that it's a very sustainable forward project, not not so like in your face and but that it's like integral to the design and the ethos of the project. And I think as Cap Metro, they are of that same mindset. So it kind of fit their own mission and kind of their own values. And I think that's what's been important. We've got some interesting feedback that, they've got another office building down the street, like their headquarters, and now they have a group working in this building. And apparently there's some jealousy with people who still have to work in the original building and instead of in Fifth and Tillery. So.
I was just going to ask who's fighting over who gets to work in the new
No.
building and who gets to work in the old one. That
I
doesn't
think,
surprise me at all.
yeah. And then I think also, and what Michael was touching on before about the way we created this project to have an open feeling and that community, that sense of connection to community, that was another value that I know Cap Metro is keyed in on. And so again, it's interesting that a building, you don't often think about it, but sometimes a building can represent values just as much as anything else. So.
I couldn't agree with that more. So let's start with the site, what little of it you had. I usually work my way when I'm talking about design, I work my way from the outside in. So obviously some of the site you brought inside the building. Tell me what you had to deal with on this site and some of the things you did there. Just strictly site work.
Yeah, I could start, and then Michael, you can certainly chime in. But I think one of the biggest things was really how to deal with stormwater and water, because again, from its existing condition, it was one building that covered the whole footprint, of it. And so, of course, all the water gets directed to the side from the roof, down to downspouts and all that kind of fun stuff. The challenge we created for ourselves is we cut a big hole in it. And now we've got to get water from the inside out, right? So that was kind of one of those challenges from the site perspective. But I think, again, the way we approached it was that courtyard acts as a rain garden. And so it's able to collect the stormwater from the roof and from the rain, falling within the courtyard. And it really treats that water before, then it gets discharged. So that was, again, part of that sustainability strategy, but then just a practical matter of getting water out from the middle of the building.
And so all this landscaping that's in these courtyards and everything, I know you have to dig down deep, and I know this site was covered in concrete. So please tell me, assuming you cut some holes in the concrete to get down, how was that challenging to get these spaces where plants would stay alive?
I think getting the soil depth was a challenge. And so working with this existing slab, obviously there's, a lot of rebar and foundation and things we had to worry about. And structurally, we got a big rig up there and drilled piers. And so all the new structure is, down deep below the foundations are deep below the existing slab. But then, they were just out there saw cutting out kind of the footprint of this rain garden, central landscaping court, and clearing everything out, and then building a bathtub and filling it up with the right materials to filter the stormwater out and let the plants thrive. So it was a real collaboration with Cameron and his team to get that right and get that experience right. But it was a little bit of, you just kind of got to cut into the concrete, see what you're working with, and then make it happen.
It's got to be a little stressful. You're cutting holes in this concrete, and if there's something there you don't want, now you've got a hole to deal with. Yeah. Did that happen at all, or did you guys have enough of a knowledge of what was there before to know?
I think there was some light scanning done, and some knowledge of what we were anticipating to deal with. But it was a lot of these implementation, especially on the landscape side, was a little bit more design build in terms of the approach. And but no, I mean, I remember going out there when they had that giant trench through the middle of the foundation and being like, all right, this is happening. We're getting this thing in, and maybe it looked a little sketchy during construction, but it came out well.
So I mean, I've been to Austin, and so I know you have a river. I don't remember the name of it, but I went up there. I had to go see the bats. I was there the right time of the year, so I had to go have the bat experience. And I don't know where this building is in relationship to the river, but I know in Portland we have rivers separating our city, so water table is always an issue. Was that an issue at all with getting your piers in and digging these holes for this project?
No, we're pretty far uphill at this site. I mean, while
Uh,
it's, while you're maybe a 10-15 minute ride to the water, it wasn't an issue.
we get all ours out of the sky for months at a time.
Yeah, it's more. I think there from a foundation perspective, right? It's more the soils. So it's on the east side of town, which are typically more clay and looser soils and less rock than if you're, in the central or west part of town. So probably going deeper than you otherwise would in other parts of town. But yeah, no water table issues, luckily.
Another issue I've heard from a number of guests doing projects like these, adaptive reuse kind of projects, especially and some, along the warehouse or some kind of production facility, is that when they start digging in the ground, found out that there was remediation that had to be done. I worked on a project here in Portland once where the site had been empty for years and years, and a developer bought the site, wanted to put a big building on it, and they discovered that it had been, back in the day, I don't know, the dark ages, a dry cleaning business for like 50 years. Guess where they were dumping all their chemicals? From dry cleaning right into the ground. They ended up having to remediate down like 12 feet and replace all of that soil because there was so much damage. I don't know what this warehouse was in its past life, but did you have anything like that you had to deal with?
Luckily, not a dry cleaning operation to clean up afterwards. No, there was a train line, a rail line that actually went across the front of the site that had been long abandoned at this point. But it was primarily a distribution warehouse. So, on
Oh,
the existing slab, we luckily didn't have giant drains. There was no, like, people weren't doing something in the warehouse where they're washing everything down and then hopefully not. I'm surprised they just dumped it all on their site with the dry cleaning warehouse. That sounds horrible.
Right.
But luckily, this
uh,
was a little bit more benign.
Clean warehouse, yeah,
Yeah.
not dirty warehouse.
well, trust me, be thankful for that. I did another interview where they were turning this old like 1930s or 40s gas station into a creative artist facility and community meeting place. And I think they did some of the craziest things I've ever heard about to remediate the ground that had been under that gas station, because standards back in the day are not what they are now.
Yeah.
Were not what they are now. They actually, remediated as much as they could of the toxic chemicals in the ground from that gas station. But and I'm not going to remember the details now because I probably did that interview like 2 years ago, but they did something to the ground and with the planting that it actually continued to help clean that toxicity out of the ground.
Yep.
And I was just like, this feels like sci-fi stuff you're talking about. I didn't even know these things existed. So you guys, yeah, you definitely got lucky there. So since I now work for a building enclosure consultant, I'm particularly more interested about the building envelope than I maybe would have been when I was working in architecture, which was most of my career. But I especially in these adaptive reuse projects, obviously light, you've already talked about how are we going to get light into this building. Heating, making a tight building is much more difficult. And I know that you didn't end up using a whole lot of the building here, but what did you do to make this because I know sustainability is big on this project. What did you do to make this a really great energy efficient building in your envelope design?
Sure. So, during the design process, there was a lot of daylight modeling and studying of views. I think one of the challenges of the site was that the existing warehouse had really long west and east facing facades. The courtyard, the shorter end of the building faces south and then the north side as well. And so we were dealing with an orientation that wasn't great. And so, doing the daylight studies, it sort of led to this strategy of right sizing punched openings on the western and eastern facades to understand, we need daylight, but actually not that much. And then where we were on the courtyard and we had natural shading from the walkways and views of nature, we did the floor to ceiling glass, or I think it's floor to 10 feet tall
Yeah,
glass,
right.
not quite ceiling, well, depending if you put one in. And so, where we were well shaded, and had great views of nature, trying to maximize those views. Then even back to the story of the site, the property that's just north of this used to be a place called Utility Research Garden, and they had planted a lot of it was a landscape design and installation firm, and they had planted a lot of great trees of amazing colors. And so that whole north facing facade is all continuous glass window wall to really capture those views of that adjacent side. And then, of course, we're not getting a lot of direct solar load on that facade either. So I think there was a lot of attention paid to the fenestration strategies where we had shading or not shading. And even on the front plaza where we've got, some pretty tall window wall in that section, we extended the PV array from the roof to create a trellis that provided shading for that space and for that glazing as well. And so really just trying to be mindful about the performance of the envelope in that way. The other thing that was just challenging from a design perspective, and we dug our own hole on this one, is that most, projects, you're going through the economics or the pro forma of a project. And on commercial projects especially, you get people looking at your ratio of building envelope to floor area and all these kind of metrics that they judge your efficiencies on. And for this client and this project, design and experience was the number one priority. But in a way, by carving this courtyard through the site and not doing like light wells or skylights or floor cutouts or some of the other strategies we had looked at, we added a lot of building envelope that you wouldn't have in kind of a different configuration. And so again, it was really important to shade that envelope that we added in a thoughtful way. But then we had to execute the envelope economically as well. And so it's, pretty much a straightforward metal panel rain screen wall assembly and a window wall system. So something that could be economical and, really, I think, achieve the goals of the project without, we weren't going in and trying to pitch a zinc cladding system for something. I mean, it would have felt out of character with the neighborhood and definitely would have made this thing never get built. So we had to be really mindful of um, those decisions to really get the project out of the ground.
I'm curious what you did for your roofing. I'm looking at the picture. You've got a lot of these PV arrays, which
Yeah.
I imagine puts quite a bit of extra weight on the roof. What kind of roofing system do you have going on there?
I I believe the project's primarily a TPO roof system,
Hmm.
and I believe the PVs are just, up on dunnage arrays. And that PV system was really interesting because that was another one where we were just looking at views of the project during design and seeing this huge roof area. And Austin has requirements for like solar ready for roof. Like when you design a project, you have to dedicate a portion of your roof for future PVs. And we got the solar consultant on board to start looking at it and crunching the numbers, and the payback period was pretty quick on it. And so it's really just one of those things that, evolved from that. But the roof system, a lot of the commercial systems are pretty um, typical. We didn't have to do anything special in terms of beefing things up for the PV array, besides
Yeah.
just knowing the weight of it and making sure it all transferred down to the foundations.
The great thing about that solar array is ultimately, it's a combination, like we said, of really a feature. So providing kind of that canopy feature at the entry, but then just ballasted, panels on dunnage on the main roof. But overall, it offsets about 75% of the electrical demand for the building. So that was really great to see the client make that investment. But again, it's got a return, so it makes sense.
Well, that is a fantastic way to accommodate the solar panels. It's just to turn them into that whole roof canopy area, because it looks great. And that's always been one of my complaints about solar panels. I mean, obviously, we're a sustainable group here in Portland as well, and we don't get the sun you do, so you don't see solar panels around here as much. But you see people put them up, and they just do it in such an unattractive way. And turning it into a feature of the building. I don't think until I started really looking at these pictures closer while we were talking, I didn't even realize those were solar panels till we started talking. I'm wait, that canopy is also solar panels. That's a great way to do it. If you could send us some sun, we'll do that here too. And I love that your building department or your codes there have a requirement that you have to
Mhm.
set aside some space for that. We have some things like that here in Portland, and I love when you see the authorities having jurisdiction getting on board with helping move us to a more sustainable and better environment in our buildings, and helping us get there by making it required.
Mhm.
That goes a long way. Let's go inside the building. What little bit there is inside, the more I'm learning about this. Tell me about some of the more unique design elements, and even if some of those interior pieces are actually exterior. Tell me about the spaces and some of the more unique design elements on the interior. None of my pictures are of the interior, so I have no idea what's going on beyond the exterior interior part.
I mean, I can touch on it. So we were the really primarily focusing on the core and shell, but I think getting back to the structural idea of the building, it really leads to some really interesting space and warmth within the building. And so going back to this idea of drilling piers in the slab, the columns that went up were basically continuous columns that went from the foundation all the way to supporting the roof structure. So those 10-inch round steel columns are continuous. And then there was, really this idea of, how do we articulate the connections of the glue lamp beams to that and sort of create these, seats that are expressed, and really thinking through like how does this sort of visual repetition of these detailings and connections really create that force like feel within the space and bring that warmth into it. And so as we weren't doing the interior design, but I think really having that hybrid timber structure and that warmth come from outside. It's, cantilevers out and supports the balconies, those walkways around the building as well. And then bring that in, it does a couple of things. It, adds a ton of warmth to the space. Connects the view or sort of the sight line from inside and out, and it really makes it a, a much different space than when you have a concrete grid at 30 feet on center. It's sort of a different experience. And, this was also designed on a typical steel grid as well. I mean, we had to go on a grid that was maneuverable around the existing structure so that we didn't have too much, I don't know, heartbreak drilling into the concrete, getting it to work, but it's a 25-foot grid for the building. But I think some of those elements, really just trying to pay attention to the detailing of this and how that works its way as this visual array across the building, like impacted kind of the quality and nature of that interior space.
The wood's definitely a game changer.
Yeah, I think it creates, I mean, even though we're not, we weren't designing the interior space, I think because of the way we did end up designing the structural system and even the floor, right? The floor is a long span metal deck. So it eliminates the need for secondary structure. So really those glulam beams are the primary horizontal structure, and those become the expression in the space. And then it's very clean after that. So I think it creates an environment for tenants that they don't have to work as hard to create something interesting and create an interesting space, right? That it kind of is given to them, and then they can kind of lay out, rooms and other spaces as they need. But the quality of the interior is, as I would call it, elevated. Then yeah, typically you get a bunch of gray concrete or steel that you're trying to cover up because it's messy and doesn't look all that appealing, or you try to paint it black, right? Make it go away.
Yeah.
So I think it contributes definitely to the interior.
Yeah, the wood just it really is a game changer on this project. If those were other materials where you have the wood, if it was steel or concrete, it would not have the warmth and the vibe that it does now, even if you had the plants. It just would not be the same kind of feel at all. So sustainability was a really big part of this project. There's a lot going on here to talk about. So can you highlight some of your more notable efforts towards sustainability on this project?
Yeah, I can start. I think for us, one thing we have realized over time, and I think we were doing it, consciously in some ways and subconsciously in others, but really the story for this project for me is creating co-benefits to the strategies you're using. So not just thinking of sustainability strategies as tackling one issue at a time, but using those strategies to do multiple things. So the most visible example is the solar array, right? Like we're collecting the sun and turning it into energy for the building, but that solar array becomes a shading feature for the spaces below, and so it helps cool the environment. Again, Texas is hot, and we love the sun, but not we don't like to linger under the sun, so as much as you can provide shade, all the better. And so that was one example. The other we kind of talked about at the beginning, where we carved this courtyard, and that was about creating more daylight into the interior spaces. But that also became where we focused a lot of our greenery and biophilia, and allowing people to see and experience nature while they're in their office. But then it also became stormwater management, right? So that courtyard and those planting areas are rain gardens. And so they help filter the stormwater runoff. That was also, where we created a significant water feature, right? So there's a runnel that carries recycled water that's captured from the roof. So we've got a bunch of cisterns that capture rainwater from the roof, and then that helps to provide water for irrigation for the planting, but then it also runs that runnel. And so that runnel goes all the way through the courtyard and helps cool the space too. So it provides, that sound of water, which is also about wellness, but then it's also a cooling factor. So it creates a microclimate. So it's all those, great co-benefits that all come together, I think, really well in this project, and really help illustrate the power, in my perspective, of integrating sustainability into your design and not just making it, part of a checklist or, something that a client asks you to add on, after you've already designed the project.
I love that because I don't think I've ever heard anybody address it quite that way before. That finding the duality in some of these things and making it a part of the building, and like your solar panels. You're collecting heat, but yet you're providing a cooler area with the same material, and it looks good. And kind of, checking off multiple boxes at once with your sustainability. I don't know that there's any better way to do it, at the end of the day. So any kind of adaptive reuse project, no matter what you're doing, comes with at least one good construction story, or one challenge you didn't. I've never worked on a project that didn't have at least one challenge during construction that you had to work your way through and make it work. Something just didn't work quite the way you wanted, or you found something that you didn't expect to find. Tell me one good construction story.
I actually don't know if there was that much construction trauma or construction administration trauma on
It
this
doesn't have to
job.
be trauma.
Or
Just, a challenge you had to work
or
through.
challenge. Yeah.
I don't call them problems.
I mean, I in a way, going back to sort of this, design build spirit that, I think some of the elements of this project had, I think there were probably less challenges and more, I think, opportunities that came out of the construction process. And so, for our client, this was their first building to integrate timber with. It had been something that they were really interested in. And, all these beautiful Doug fir glue lamps came from Rosboro. And, they were site fabricated as well. And, just, the challenges of working with timber. At a certain point, they're like giant 2x4s. And,
Yeah.
we'd be out there doing CA, and, there were definitely a couple structural things that we had to work through, or intersections and joints that weren't thought out. But there were also a lot of opportunities. Like, we were out there with Cameron Campbell, the landscape architect, and there's just sitting on the side of the parking lot is this stack of discarded glue lamps just kind of in this pile. And Cameron's looking at him, and we're like, man, these are really beautiful pieces of wood, but, are these just going to be recycled? Like, what's happening with it? And we're like, can we use these? And they're like, sure, we're not planning to do anything with them. And so, all those benches through the landscaping on the ground level we changed the landscape design because we were out there watching them put the structure up, and there were just all these cuts from, the on-site fabrication process, that we were able to reuse and integrate into the story. But, I think obviously just, probably the biggest challenges were just some of the details in terms of bringing timber and steel together and some of the intersections. But no big surprises or things that I remember losing
Well, that's a
sleep
good
over.
thing.
I think to me, this is that is a good example. And I've done quite a bit of adaptive reuse in my career. And one of the things I tell most people about it is like, there are challenges because you're working with existing conditions, but really, if you do approach them as opportunities, you'll find a lot more satisfaction in the end. Like, there are always those just like things that just really don't work that you got to work around. But for us, staying true to your design, but having that flexibility that when you run into something unexpected, that you find the value in it, right? Because it's offcuts from glue lamp become beautiful benches in a landscape. Sometimes it's old machinery that gets pulled out, and that becomes features in a landscape. Or you dig into something and you find something that you weren't expecting, and you can either recycle it or reuse it in some other way. So I think for adaptive reuse projects, that's always how we try to approach it, is that those difficult moments can often be, some of the most interesting features of a project.
Well, I will say that number one, I thought those benches were a part of the plan. I love them. I love that, especially sunny outside. I don't care how hot it gets. You want to get out and get fresh air sometimes. And I love that your team was open-minded enough to pivot and look at that and see the possibility in it during construction. By that time, nobody's wanting to pivot on anything most of the time. It's just, we need to get this job done, and to spot that and go, what can we do with these? And turn them into something that I truly did think was planned from the beginning for this project, and make whatever changes you need to. That's pretty impressive, because most people will not, because it's more work, right? It's more hours, it's more time, because you're changing the game a little bit in the middle of construction, and most people won't take that step. A lot of people won't take that step. And so kudos to you. I'm in love with this project already, but that you could be, your team, your whole team, your owner, everybody could be open enough to say, hey, let's change this up with this. That's really, the firms that work like that are the firms that do the best projects, because you don't ever shut that design door. Obviously we all have a budget to work within. We all understand that. But you leave your mind open to the possibilities. You already paid for the glue lamps.
Yep.
And, and it's also sustainable. So there's that duality you have again in another item on the project. Before we get to our two closing questions, and I don't know, that shouldn't surprise me from Gensler anyway. Before we get to our two closing questions, tell me what the Austin office is working on that I get to call you and say, okay, now I want to hear about this one.
Maybe I can, or Michael, if you have something in mind, you can start.
There's a lot of NDAs.
We'll know soon. I think for us, so the Austin office for Gensler we're approaching our 18th year, as an office here in Austin. So we've been fortunate enough to be involved in a lot of what we hope are impactful projects for the city and the region. And what we're seeing now as an office is actually extending that now nationally and internationally. So the exciting thing about our work here in Gensler, Austin, is that we're having that same impact and taking some of that same design thinking and dedication to craft, outward beyond our city boundaries and regional boundaries. So we're excited about some of those possibilities. But, even though we have those opportunities, to make that impact elsewhere, we're still very much focused here in Austin and trying to build a great practice, trying to, again, make those connections for community and really make great places that people want to be and live and spend time and, hang out with friends and see one another and all that kind of stuff. So that's, I think some specifics we'll definitely have to follow up with you on.
Well, you don't, let me tell you this, you don't have to wait for an invitation. So you have something that comes up, it just is honestly an email. Hey, Cherise, you want to talk about this? Yeah. And we'll set it up. I'm truly hoping that we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast, and I'm hoping some of our design professionals really heard you today, because I think you had some really valuable insight to share in how we look at our buildings and sustainability and how we use our materials. And that's the first time I've been around a while. We're not going to add that up, but I've ever heard it expressed quite that way and it looked at quite that way. And I think that's invaluable. And I'm hoping more of our professionals will be running from this episode to their desk going, wait a minute, why didn't we think about doing this with this as well? So I'm excited about this interview, because being around as long as I have, I don't get to hear new things a whole lot. So we always close with two closing questions. The first one being a broad industry question, and the second one everybody gets, painful or not, whether you want to answer it. So sustainability was an important part of this project. We've been talking about that a lot. Broadly, as an industry, What do you think are the most impactful things we can be doing in our building designs to make the biggest difference?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I, we don't build our buildings these days, just to create monuments. I mean, some people do, but for the most part, we're creating buildings for humans, for that human experience. And so I think being mindful of that, and how our buildings impact people's health, people's well-being. And I think that plays into sustainability in a huge way. Like, again, you really, if you walk into a building that's well thought out and well executed from sustainable materials and indoor air quality and daylight, it's just it has a different effect on you than any other space. So I think if we can, focus our energy on creating buildings that have those qualities and bring that level of joy to people, hopefully, I think that's where again, the rubber meets the road. It's not just talking about performance. It's not just talking about, we use this great material or we save this much carbon. Those are all the sort of the outcomes or the outputs of our efforts. But hopefully in the end, it's really about the people that move in and around our buildings and spaces.
Yeah, just to echo that, I mean, I think really focusing on the end user and really, there is so much tremendous research around how the built environment impacts people, impacts their health and well-being. I mean, the project we've been talking about is a commercial office building. And, when you look at a lot of companies out there, 90+% of their overhead, their expenses is their people. I mean, the the well-being and performance of the people that are working for you, part of your organization, part of your community, um, is heavily impacted by their built environment. And so that was, we talked a lot about a lot of great sustainable strategies, but at the end of the day, most of them were rooted around really measurable, impactful things that make everybody's experience a better thing day in, day out. And we've talked about it: daylighting, fresh air, views to nature, and there's Cherise. Well, I'll have to share some of the research we have on this with you, but just even thinking about that overhead for a company and then absenteeism or drop in performance. I mean, I think creating a great place, just has a tremendous impact on the people that use it. So I think our architecture and our practice is heavily focused on what that experience is, not just as Travis mentioned, we're not out trying to make monuments. We're trying to make, great places that, people love to be in.
One of my favorite little words of wisdom I like to impart in numerous situations, even having nothing to do with the work that we do, is don't forget, at the end of the day, it's always about the people. That's a good life lesson in anything you do. And we do. Like I'd love to see that research. I really would, because, they put in a building, and I don't know that there's a huge focus always on the people. There's a focus on, having a nice workspace, and there'll be some little amenity spaces. But I worked in an office once that had these little telephone cubes. So you could privately, because it was an open office environment, go have a phone call. That was great, but they were actually not very comfortable spaces to be in. Right. Like, the heart was there to do the right thing, but they were and it was a full glass door. So if you needed to have a more personal conversation, things happen in life, and you're at work a lot of the times when they happen. There wasn't really privacy. Everybody walking by you could see the look on your face, I think that more research should be done on that. And I love that you have some, because that's the first time I've ever heard anybody say that to me as well. So I would love to see that. Final question, everybody that since we started this podcast, what are we going on, year 4 now, has had to answer this question. I sarcastically joke, it's the easiest question of the day. We all hope, or I really hope that we all are trying to live a life that leaves some kind of contribution to make the world a better place. So personal or professional, big or small, what do you hope your contribution will be?
I could start. I guess for me, it's it's somewhat back to my answer at the beginning about creating great places. But I think hopefully it's as a designer, as an architect, that the impact is to provide some inspiration or some optimism out in the world, right? So that we have a whole lot of stresses and other things that we deal with, and the world changes on a dime sometimes. But if you can have a home, you can have a place you work, you can find those spaces that are familiar to you within a city, that they have that quality of optimism, that would be where I hope my impact, starts to land. And it's not just, again, creating monuments in the sky or things of that nature.
I think you're doing a good job of it. How about you, Michael?
I mean, I think to echo what Travis is, hitting on, I always go back to, you're a first year architecture student, you're learning about architecture, and you're learning about firmness, commodity, and delight. And I think what the world needs a lot more these days is more delight. I mean, I think we've got enclosure specialists and structural engineers and folks to help us with the other two. But I think, bringing a little bit more magic into our built environment and the unexpected, and just, places that are just really fun to be in, is sort of something that, I think is, core to this project we've been talking about. And, where I'd love to do more good in the world by creating more great environments like that. And then I think, the other part, and, one of the exciting things, I've worked with Travis for a long time, and, love the creative process working with him and others here in our Austin office, is really just, I think the culture of design and collaboration, getting back to that idea of process where, the Fifth and Tillery is the result of that culture and that process. And so I think, Travis and myself as design leaders in our Austin office, that's also something that we're looking to leave behind and continue to build a practice that leads to more architecture that, has a real positive benefit for the world. And, as Travis mentioned, I think transformation or transformational is a word we like to think about in terms of what we're crafting and how we're impacting our neighborhoods and communities and the people around us.
Well, congratulations, because I know you did that here. I will tell you, taking off my industry hat to the whole other half of me that does all kinds of other crazy things, a space affects me greatly. I'm a big marshmallow. I want light, and I want to feel comfortable, and I want to feel safe, and I want to feel that joy and that magic, which is not 2 words you ever hear using in this business. Ever hear anyone using. And that's like my mindset for life in general. I want to find as much joy and as much magic as possible everywhere I go. And you will never know in a million years how many people walk into a space you design and feel that. They're not even going to notice it sometimes. It's just like, yeah, I feel good here. You know where places you like to go, right? Mm-hmm. Because you feel safe or comfortable or happy or whatever. That's a huge impact. It changes your day. So please keep that culture, and keep letting that culture bleed into your projects, because those are going to be the ones that go the long haul and that people want to be in. Well, you're already seeing this. They're fighting in jealousy over who gets to work in the new building. And I don't blame them. Travis and Michael, thank you so much for joining me today. This is an amazing project. I hope you will come back and tell me about more of your work, because now you're on my joy and magic list. It's like, I want to see what else they do. You'll find one person here or there that maybe feels that way, but you guys emanate it. So I want to hear more. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having us here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Reese. It was a pleasure.